Hello and welcome. In this demonstration, we will show you how to install DockShell 2.0 for Visual Studio 12 RC Edition. Basically, there are two installers. There is a installer for the DockShell shell extension, and there's an installer for the uh, DockShell navigation and application layout tool. So it doesn't matter which order you install them. Let's just pick one and we'll go ahead and install it. Basically, this will be the screen that comes up, and you read through the agreement. If you agree to the agreement, you can install it. And we'll do the same thing for this one. Excellent. So basically now we have both of the extensions installed. Let's run Visual Studio and create our first DockShell 2.0 LightSwitch project. Okay, with Visual Studio open, now let's create a LightSwitch project. C# project. We're going to call this one NorthWind. Okay, great. And what we'll do is we'll add the NorthWind data source, and we're going to add a bunch of screens, and we'll run it to see what it looks like in LightSwitch without DockShell. Okay, so I've added the data source, NorthWind data source, to the project, and now we're going to add a few screens. So basically a customer list. And I'll go ahead and add the rest of the screens and come back. Okay, so I've added the following screens. Now what we'll do is go in and set up the navigation. So currently the navigation has one area at the top. We're going to rename this, and we'll call it Customers. And we'll add another group, and in this group we will call it Employees. We'll add a third group, and we'll call this one Orders. And what we'll do is we'll keep customer-related screens to the Customer tab, and so we will remove these from this navigation group. And I want to move the admin to the end. And now for employees, we'll just add the employees. And for orders, we'll add orders and create new order. So there's your navigation group. The order that you set it up in here is the order by which DockShell uses. So we'll just save that. And at this point here, we don't have the DockShell extension enabled, and we are using NorthWind, and we'll just go ahead and run it. And here we see the screen open, and it's functioning as per how we had set it up, so forth and so forth. Okay, it's time to add some DockShell components to this. So what we'll do is, the first thing you need to do is add the extension. So if it's installed correctly, you should see this option here to install. And after a short bit of time, it'll install the extension. The second thing that you need to do is change your shell. So change your shell to DockShell and hit save. And we can close that down. Then the next thing we want to do is change the view. So from the logical view, we want to go to the file view and expand the client project and expand the references. At this point, what we're going to do is we're going to add a what we call a provider project, which basically provides a lot of the meat around the various controls that will be brought in. Provider projects are highly extensible. We basically provide to our licensed customers the source code, and from there the customer can edit and change the code to their liking. So let's add the provider project. So right click, add reference. And so this is the provider we're using today will be Telerik. And because we're using Telerik, the provider is dependent on Telerik assemblies. So we just so happen to have all the assembly references here, and you add those to your client project. Great, and so you can minimize that. At this point, you do need to do a quick build, and the reason for that is to ensure that the provider reference is actually compiled into the application. As you'll see in the next step, which is right now, what we'll do is we will add a model. And so the first thing we want to do is create a new folder. We'll call it model. Right click, add, new item. At this point, we're adding the LightSwitch, DockShell LightSwitch navigation and layout model. And once we do this, it will, and if you just click on that screen, you'll see that it's committing updates to store. Basically, what's happening now is it's iterating through your project, looking at your LightSwitch artifacts, your navigation groups, your LightSwitch screens, any commands that you've added, and so forth. And it's adding them to an inventory that it'll soon surface on this application plan, this model that's just done. If your project's big, you've got a lot of screens, this may take up to 2 minutes or more to complete. We'll try to optimize that in the future. Basically, the delay is around business rules and so forth that are associated to the various elements that are being dropped. Let's have a quick look at what's generated here, and zoom out a little bit. All right, so you'll notice that there are 2 swim lanes in this diagram. There is a navigation and layout domain elements and a LightSwitch elements. We'll start with the LightSwitch elements. You'll notice here that these are collapsible groupings, and hopefully it's obvious that these groups correlate to your LightSwitch navigation groups that you had set up previously and in the order that you had set them up. So for example, we had customers, employees, orders, and administration that we had set up earlier. And we'll change over to this so that we can see that. So minimize that and minimize that. And so this is the same information, it's just surfaced a little differently. So if we look here, we see 2 screens, and if we expand this, we'll see 2 screens. So the definition of a screen is defined with an icon and these little colored circles. These little colored circles represent very specific types of action associated to a light switch screen. So the purple circle refers to a, let's pull up the properties so we can see it. It refers to a design command. So when you're in LightSwitch as a developer, you have the ability to design. This is what this circle is, or command is associated to. The yellow one is navigation, and when we zoom in a little bit here. LightSwitch really doesn't have the concept of a navigation command, so this is more or less an inferred command, but basically the idea is that when this is executed, it would launch this particular LightSwitch screen. In this case, it's the customer list detail screen. The red circles represent data commands that it's picked up from your application or from your screen itself. So we have a save and a refresh command. And extending off of these is the actual implementation of within the DockShell framework. This is a what we call a DockShell command, and essentially we'll go through the properties and setting this up in a little bit, but each one of these represents a DockShell command tied to a LightSwitch command. And you can have multiple DockShell commands tied to the same LightSwitch command, and you can change the type of the DockShell command to your liking. So you can build your own types, or you can use the out-of-the-box provider types. So the colored aspects, or the circles, actually become more related to this information here. And what we're looking at here is what we refer to as a DockShell navigation container control. And you can see inside this particular icon we have some colored squares, and each one of these represents a target as defined by a prism region. Since this is XAML and since you have the ability to author your own layouts, you can include or exclude these targets and include additional targets beyond the named region targets. So a named region target would be, of course, a data region, a design region, gold is navigation region, and green is actions command. So within your LightSwitch application, if you were to add a command that is neither a navigation or a design command, it would show up as a green circle, and we'll do that in a little bit. And then because it's an action command, it will automatically surface itself inside this particular region. So we mentioned that this is a navigation container control. A navigation container control could be a variety of different types of controls. In this particular example, we're using the default navigation control from the Telerik provider library, which happens to be a ribbon tab control, a rad ribbon tab control. Below this, you'll see another container. This container is called a DockShell content container. Essentially, content containers are where the screens are actually surfaced. Your LightSwitch screens are surfaced. And in this example, we're establishing that the content container by default is a dock control. Again, you can build your own content containers and build them in your own XAML and form and have them as optional items that you can choose to surface the screens in. As we move over a little bit, we notice that we have two other areas of discussion. We have this customer list detail icon, which is basically a Windows shell layout. And as you can see from the properties, this allows you to establish some default surfacing options around the LightSwitch screen itself. And below that is a thing called a DockShell view container control. A DockShell view container control is really where the LightSwitch screen ultimately gets surfaced or injected. And in that particular view container, there are additional regions, prism regions that, again, are defined in the XAML definition. So, of course, that being said, you could create a copy of this default container, and you could change up the look and feel as you'd like. And we refer to this as the chrome around the screen. So, and we'll show you some workings around this. Okay, there's a bit of work we have to do on the navigation side of things. Because navigation is not a command per se within LightSwitch. There is no icon associated to this. There's no default icon out of the box. And so, although that's a disadvantage because we have to configure it, it's also an advantage because we can configure it the way we like to configure it. So the easiest thing we like to do is to sort of say set the any mass attributes. In this case, we have one that we want to set. And so what we do is we will expand all of the navigation groups, and then we will select the DockShell navigation command for each one of the screens that we have. Right, and what we're going to do is we're going to change this use default icon. So basically, it always comes in as a LightSwitch screen, but in this scenario, there is no LightSwitch screen. We want to change that to local. So that'll change it for all of those navigation commands. And what we next need to do then is define some definition around each one of these. So for example, we have this one, which is customer list. So we'll change this to, say, customers, and we'll just put a tooltip in here, list of all customers. And let's put an icon on this one. So we'll just pick the icons we have some demo icons that we want. So we're actually configuring the customers list. So let's pick the customers icon for that and hit OK. And this is the large icon that we'll be using for this particular demo. And so I'm going to go through and I'm going to apply all the other icons associated to this, and then we'll resume the video. Okay, so all of the navigation commands have been updated, so their text and the icon are now available. And so if we were to right click and validate this at this point, you're going to see that there's a bunch of errors that'll pop up. And this is because we're not quite finished. And if you double click on each one of these, it will actually show you the element that's in error. And this one's in error because it's missing a container. We'll explain that right now. In a DockShell application, we do need a root application root control. Basically, this is your shell root, and there is a default shell out of the box. Now, what we're about to show you for the first time is our MEF export picker, and basically what this does is it shows you the list of controls that are associated to a specific domain element. So in this case here, we're looking at a DockShell root type control. And so it's only going to show in this tool those MEF controls that are actually based on a DockShell root. And in this case, there's only one. However, you can build your own shells, and they're quite easy to do. You make a copy of this one and modify it, but we'll pick this one. And as we pull this down a little bit, you can see that there's a couple of things that were added once we chose that particular shell. And one of the areas we'll talk about here is this navigation ribbon view area. And that's an area of XAML that where you define a couple of regions. Basically, this is called what we call a navigation view control region, and the idea is that you will take your just pin this up for a sec. You will drag your and associate your ribbon tabs, in this case, to this region, and the ribbon tab is associated at this point, if I was to click on this, to a Telerik rad ribbon view. So the rad ribbon view portion of it is actually defined within the XAML of this shell, and you can change that to your liking. In other words, it doesn't have to be a rad ribbon. It could be a rad ribbon view. It could be some other type of navigation kind of container, such as a cover flow or layout view or tile view or any of those types of navigation type controls. And again, depending on the provider, those options will be more or less based on what the provider, third-party control provider provides as far as those types of controls. The second area here is what we refer to as the DockShell content container collection. And the collection control is, in this case here, is just a simple grid. But it is where we need to sync and collect the content containers as part of the application. So as we recall, these were ribbon tabs. These are a docking control. And as you can see here, we have more than one docking control associated to this application. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to delete a few of these to make things a little easier for us. And we'll keep that one. And what we're going to do is we will now relate each ribbon tab, and in fact we'll call this one shared dock, or shared docking area, let's say. So basically, we're only going to have one docking control, and our ribbon tabs will basically share that one docking tab. Now this is one way that you can do it, is just simply linking it and dragging up like this, the way I'm doing it. The other way is, what I'm going to show you is you can multi-select And by the way, if you can undo as well, so just a Control Z, you can see, we'll push things back. All right, so if we, whoops, multi-select. So I'm going to select these ones here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the navigation view control for all three of those ribbon tabs to be this here. Now, you can actually have this application. This is an application navigation container, which contains the navigation view control and content container collection control. You can actually have multiples of these. So, for example, you might want to have like a dashboard which has a tile view, and that's the initial sort of navigation structure that the program runs into at the start, and then from there it goes into ribbon tabs, for an example. Later on in an advanced video, we'll get into some of that. These little cyan-based squares that you see up in this area here, they too are prism regions, but they're not the named prism regions. So in other words, they're not data, design, navigation, or action type regions. These are custom regions, and you can make as many as you'd like. As we kind of poke around this, we can see that there's one called an axis toolbar. So I'm just going to move that up here, put that there. And we have this thing called a context region menu, so I'll stick that up there. And these other two are just, they're actually related to these two right here. So they are the regions associated to taking or accepting in either a tab or a content container. And so what we'll do now is we just need to finalize one last bit here. This unmapped really doesn't ever surface as far as on the screen, but it does need to have some kind of a home. Otherwise, we won't have a valid model. So speaking of valid, let's check. Yep, there's output, and there's no errors or associated to this model. So we're ready to run. So let's run it and see what we get. And so when the application spins up, it's going to look a little different than the out of the box. Because at this point what we're actually seeing is the inversion of control where we're actually taking the third-party ribbon controls or third-party controls, Silverlight controls, and using them in a way that completely changes sort of the navigation look and feel. Now, the interesting thing here to note here is that we are currently running in an eval mode, which limits you to 2 tabs and 4 screens. In order for us to move beyond that, because we actually have more than that we want to show, we actually need to install a license key. So I'm going to put the license key, which goes right in here. And by the way, these properties here that you're seeing here are show up when you click on this back area here. And so we'll get into some of these other properties in a bit, but I'll fill in this license key and then we'll re-execute this program. Okay, now the license key is installed. Let's just rerun the application. And what's happening here is that we are surfacing a series of controls, and how it actually gets down to your LightSwitch application is via way of T4 templates. So the model that you're building or constructing, actually, when you hit the save of the application or the model itself, it'll actually generate a bunch of C# classes or VB.NET classes, depending on your project type, and those classes or partial classes get compiled into your application. Okay, so we can see here that we have 3 tabs, which correspond nicely to the tabs that we had in our application. You'll notice here that we're missing the save and the refresh text, but we'll change that in a second. But you can see here that as I navigate between each of these tabs, this docking area here is being shared. If we didn't share it the way it was originally, then each time I would do this, it would change this and isolate it, which in some cases you'd want that, in some cases you don't want that. So let's have a quick look at this layout here for a second. And notice here that I've opened up this customer list detail screen, and notice that it's surfacing itself inside the view container. So the view container is what we refer to as the Chrome, and you can see that there's a toolbar that's at the top of this particular view container, and it's also very much data aware. So as you make a change, it shows you that there is a change. So that's associated. That's a data binding at a view model level, and it's a docking control. So that means that that's where the term DockShell comes from, I guess. It provides the ability to add additional windows and so forth, and lay them out in a way that is your preference, so to speak. And so as you lay out these controls and push them wherever you want to push them, they will, depending on if you've set the property or not, but you'll have the ability to persist the layout. So as I open this up again, it will resurface that same screen in the same location that it was last left at. So if the user was to say float the screen as such and close the screen, when they reopen it, it should reopen itself in the same location as it did before. There is a particular challenge with the Telerik controls around floating, so we'll get into that in a little bit. But basically, there's your layouts and layout capability. And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a bit more, a few more changes to the application. So I'll close this down and we'll get back into the model. All right, so let's now. What we're going to do is we're going to add a common default icons for saving and refreshing. So we're going to change the out-of-the-box look, and we'll start with the large icon here. And what I'm going to do is pick a, let's see, data. This is data save. Say OK. And on the refresh, same thing. Okay, and we'll minimize that. We'll go to our save data. Oops, pick it. And save. It's just a smaller bitmap, provides better resolution. And it's popping off the screen from the video only because it's wants to do that. Okay, so there we go. We've got our defaults now. And so what we're going to do is we're going to change these commands here so that they're actually pushing out to the default instead of to the LightSwitch command. So right now, if you look at each one of these, they are using the built-in LightSwitch icons. And so what we're going to do is we're going to override that behavior, and we'll just zoom out a little bit and do that. Pick each one of these independently of each other. And there we go. And what we'll do is we'll change this. Instead of saying use the default icon, and we're not going to have it local, we're actually going to have it use the global save data. And whilst we're here, we might as well put some text in and finish that. So save. And if you want, you can say save changes. And let's do the same thing on the refresh. So we'll pick all the refresh buttons. And say refresh. And refresh data. Might have put the wrong text in there. Okay, and now we'll just pick the refresh data command. Okay, so let's take a look and see how that looks. Okay, so if I open the customer screen, you can now see that the save icon and the refresh icon are actually, looks like I put that tooltip in the wrong area. You can see it's showing up here for the refresh button. But essentially we've changed the out-of-the-box items. And I kind of like this design one. I didn't like the other two, but I do like the design. So that's good, and we'll save that. What we're going to do now is we'll show how we can actually control a contextual menu. In order to do a contextual menu, what we're going to do is we're going to create a, we'll go back to the Solution Explorer, we'll change it back to Logical View, and let's go to the, let's see, Customer Detail screen. And what we'll do is we'll add a command which will basically toggle the contextual menu that we're going to add. And basically what it'll be is it'll be the orders menu. So let's add a new button, and let's say we'll call this one Show Orders. Okay, and save that. And then if we go back to our model and right click, and so this is the customer details, and just do a refresh. You can see that that command is now surfaced, and it's an action command. So just to recap, action commands will show up in the green squares. So in this case here, here, and here, provided you have this particular setting turned on. So right now out of the box, this particular command will actually show up in the into this prism region because we're saying that it is a set to true on this particular property within the properties for this DockShell command. So let's decorate this with an icon, and let's just put some text on there. So show orders, and press, or so toggle contextual menu. Contextual menu. Spell it would be good. There we go. And let's pick an icon. And so right out of the box, it's wanting to use LightSwitch, which we don't have anything defined there. We could have, but we didn't. So we're going to use a local icon, and in this case here, we'll pick one. And let's see, show orders. Sounds good. All right, and so if we run that right now, nothing's going to happen. It'll show the button, but we need some code behind to basically toggle the contextual. But before we do that, let's actually add a contextual container, which is this particular icon here, and we'll just drag that down. And so first thing you want to do is kind of link that to the area that you want to be contextual. In this case, it's just going to be the orders ribbon tab. And then if you go in here, you can pick the colors. So let's pick, let's say Azure, and let's say we'll just put $3 as the header text. Again, it needs to know the type of MEF control that you want there. So if you pick, you notice it's coming up with the DockShell contextual container control as being the only interfaces that it'll look for. In this case, there's only one, which is part of the default project provider. So what we also need to do is give this a name that we'll call this one customer orders contextual. And so with that in play, we can save that. Excuse me. And we will go back to our LightSwitch screen and go and select the execute code. And so I'm going to paste some code in here. So I've quickly pasted some code in here. We'll go through the explanation of this in a little more depth in later videos. But essentially, when you create your LightSwitch application, you automatically get a we create a partial class for your application, and in that partial class there's a thing called a DockShell service proxy, and this is basically a little bit of a gateway into the backend side of DockShell. And as you can see here, what we're doing is we're getting a contextual container by the name that we gave inside the model, and all we're doing here is we're toggling the state of it. So if it's in one state, we turn it into the other state. And in this case here, we're not only toggling it and making it active, we're actually making it active and selecting it, which is what this is doing here. So that's good. And so we'll save that code and we're done with the screen. Okay, so now we have, to recap, we have this button that when pressed will enable or disable the contextual menu. So let's run that and see what we've done. Okay, so as you may recall, we put that command on the customer's detail screen. So what we should see when this screen pops up is we should see the show orders button, and we do. And we see the tooltip. So if we click that, you can now see that the contextual menu has shown up and it's actually selected. And the $3 signs and the color azure is there. So it's probably not as noticeable here. We're going to change the color. Let's do that right now. We'll change this to a different color just so that it's a little more noticeable. Because what I wanted to show you was that the tab itself was also changing in the. So let's pick Cadet Blue. We're going to make this into a so you can see the actual colors. We'll run this and see what it looks like. Okay, so same thing. All right, and now you can see that the top of the tab, if I was to click off of it, you can see that it's actually colored the same as the highlighted area above. That's kind of the nature of the contextual containers. Now you'll notice here, this works really well because we're in the shared tab control, so it's actually not changing anything. And if I click on this, you can see that it opens up the orders screen quite nicely. Everything kind of fits together as I move across here. And if I was to go back to this guy, I can untoggle it and so forth. That's great. So let's add some more commands to this. Okay, so at this point here, what we're going to do is let's take the same command and we're going to add it to the commands that are up as far as the default command as part of the actual control itself, the quick access toolbar area. So this is that prism region that's defined in your XAML, and basically it's tied to the quick access toolbar as part of the shell. And so what we need to do is a couple of ways you can do this, and just copy this particular control and paste it. So we get pretty much the same thing. And now what we're going to do is we're going to link this to that same LightSwitch command. So we've made two DockShell definitions basically. And this is still going to, we still want this to be a ribbon button, which is fine. But what we're going to do is we're going to say that instead of it surfacing inside the navigation container, we'll turn that off, we want it to surface in a non-container. So a non-container is basically not a view container, not a content container, not a navigation container. It's anything else. And in this case here, when it's these cyan prism regions, those are considered to be non-container sinks. Or essentially, another way of looking at it is these are named regions. So data, design, navigation, and action, and these are anything else. And so that's really what this is saying, is that don't put them into these very specific areas where there's named regions. The second thing that we want to look at is that when this when this command is surfacing inside this quick access toolbar, we want to make sure that it's the right size and so forth. So we look here, we can see that this is set to small. Small versus medium versus large. Basically, medium is a small icon with text, and small is just the small icon without text. And large is obviously the large icon with text. So the next thing we need to do is put a icon on here that associates to the we don't have one that's small, so we'll just use this one here. It'll not be as nice a resolution. Say yes, it's just, there we go. And I think that's about it for now. We don't need any text on this one, so we can just get rid of that. And we don't need, well, we can leave the tooltip on there. I think that's all we want. Actually, what we need to do is we actually need to link it. So we link it from here up to, I think that's the contextual. Let me just check that. Right, that's the wrong area. let's just link that to this guy here. Now we should be able to run it. Okay, so now when we select the customer screen, we should see the toggle option, the show orders option here, but we'll also see it up here because, and if you click on it, you can see that it actually toggles just like it would when it's down here. So that's and it's not as easy to see, so you might want to reverse this icon and make this white instead of black. You know, so that's something that you can do with your icon choice of icons. So basically, you can tie many DockShell commands to a single LightSwitch command. This is what we're trying to demonstrate here. In fact, let's do one more, but this time what we'll do is we'll make a context menu. And so let's just use the same definition that we have here, and we'll link it to the same action, LightSwitch action. But instead of it being a ribbon bar, or sorry, ribbon button, let's change that, and we'll change it to be a menu item command. And I think that's just about all we need to do. Oh, since it's menu item, we want to have some text on there. So let's say show order, or toggle orders maybe, I don't know. And then the last thing we need to do is kind of link it to a context menu, which is going to be the one that's up here, and we'll hit run. Okay, and same thing. So the context menu is actually built on the shell, and it's just hardwired into the shell. So if I right click, now you can see show orders is showing up as a context menu. And so you can do it that way, you can toggle it this off, and you can do it this way. So there's now 3 points of action associated to the same endpoint from a LightSwitch command perspective, which is kind of nice. And so we haven't actually done anything with this ribbon bar. Why don't we try adding some commands to there and see what that does for us. So let's close that down. And well, the coolest thing is that it's not that hard to do. All you got to do is pick these 2 guys here and say, I want to also surface those inside the view container. Now, because we set these as defaults, these 2 commands, to be the global default, so they're actually picking from these areas here and here, then we don't have any other work to do other than change this flag here. What that says is that when building these commands, you can push those into any view container that, in this case, it's red, so that's data, that has a red or a data region, which is these ones down here. So what we'll do is we can just make all of our guys, multi-selecting all of these, oh, not that guy, and we'll set the toggle on these guys in accordance to that. There we go. And let's run that and see what that looks like once it's finished. There we go. Okay. And let's select customers and see what we get. There you go. And now you can see that the same commands are here. So if I make a change and hit refresh, it's basically wired to the same command as up top here. So there's your command structures. Okay, we have another thing that we want to show. It's called a UI fragment. And a UI fragment is basically a piece of XAML that you can define and extend and put different types of control support that you may wish to include inside your LightSwitch application. So in this case here, there's some pre-canned examples of some UI fragments. And so we'll pick one here, and we'll pick the drop-down button. So this is a rad drop-down button. And so let's give that the same name. So we'll just call this the drop-down button. And let's have some text in here, and let's just say, I don't know, order options or actions. And let's put a icon on this one. And let's pick a icon. Let's see. Maybe that one. So see if that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but that's okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this this piece of XAML and we're going to sync it into a region. So normally you probably have another one of these kind of custom regions somewhere in your definition of your ribbon tab. In this case here, I'm just going to sync it into the actions area of that ribbon tab. So that's pretty much done. I think it's got some text. Yep. And let's run that and see what we get. Okay, so now you can see that it's basically added this drop-down button to the screen actions, and only for the customers, obviously. May not be what we really wanted, but it's there. So now let's put some context menu underneath it. So we'll just close this down. And to do that, all we need to do is add another UI fragment. And let's give this the name of context menu. And basically pick whatever name you want. And we're choosing the out of the box or out of the provider backend provider project, the rad context menu of type DockShell uFragment. Again, you can build your own UI fragments, and as long as you support that interface and give it a unique MEF name, which is the same rules of engagement you'd use for everything. Okay, so now we basically wired in a context menu into that drop-down button. And so what we will do now is we'll take that same command that we have over here, and we will push it into that context menu. And I think that's all we need to do. And we can hit run and see what we get. Okay, and let's see. So nothing there now, and let's run customers. So as you recall, when the customer screen is executed, currently there was 1, 2, and of course the context menu 3, but now there's a 4th one, right? Which is basically the same command. And again, it works just the same way as all the other commands, toggling it back and forth and doing all of its business. So you can see you have quite a bit of flexibility in how you set up your commands and all that good stuff. A couple of things that I wanted to point out that are that we haven't really discussed yet. You'll notice that there's this area here. This is actually a breadcrumb control, Telerik breadcrumb control. In DockShell 2.0, we actually have a navigation controller and a set of services and view models associated to that. And the idea behind that is you will have the ability to, when you're moving between the navigation containers, not just at the tab level, but if you were to, as I pointed out before, you can have the layout controls as maybe a dashboard. Using this particular breadcrumb, you'll be able to go back and forth between the various screens that you have open and so forth. We're not going to go through that right now in a demo, but essentially that's how it works. So there you have it. That's DockShell 2.0 introduction, and there's quite a bit more that needs to be shown, but at least you get an idea and a sense as to the capability of the new framework and the new modeling tools that are part of it. And just wanted to point one thing out here. This kind of looks starting to get kind of messy. We do have the option of right-clicking on the background of the model, and it shows you all the options and links that you can turn on and off. And by doing so, you start to diminish the noise associated to that. And of course, you can undo and basically get everything back into the state that you want. The other way to do it is just by minimizing the groups. Just minimize each group, and that will actually minimize the amount of links that are originating out of those areas and so forth. We should also just point out one other thing, which we haven't talked about yet, and that's the T4 process that happens under the covers. So when you added a model, we gave it a very specific name. And so if we go to our file view and under our client, as we go back to where we actually started, we added this from at the very start, which began the sort of the demo that we're in right now. But this has all of a sudden shown up. And what is this? This is this T4 template that we were referring to earlier. And if you look here, there's a code file that's been created. And inside here is basically the same definition that you are describing in the model, and it's converted into a series of partial classes. If you give these your elements names, it will use the name instead of this. And the advantage of that is then you can interact with these partial classes. Certain classes will have overrides, and for example, if you wanted to get the instance of, let's say, the window, the third-party controls window, this would be one way that you could do it. You could hook it through. There's a service that you can grab that information from. But by naming your element within your model, then it will give you a better name and a much easier time of it. So, for example, right now, if I look at this one here, there is a name here, customer ribbon, customer's ribbon, and if you were to look here and do a quick search for customer ribbon, nope, I guess I'm wrong. As I spell that right, customers. There we go. As you can see, that it's choosing to use the name without the spaces. You just be careful that you name them uniquely. We don't have unique name checker on those names, so if you get a compile error in this particular file, it's probably because you've chosen names that conflict with each other. Just simply make them not conflict, and you're your way to go. But you can see that there's a lot of definition that's happening here. There's the prism regions that we saw earlier inside our area in here, and if you follow the logic a little bit, you can start to figure out how this all sort of works and binds together. But that's what DockShell uses at runtime. So this gets compiled, and then at runtime, DockShell has the complete meta story in partial classes, with the flexibility of you overriding any of the potential overrides that might exist on those classes. So that's a good intro to DockShell 2.0. Hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you very much for watching this video.